Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be scripting the portals in our game. As always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, with Patreon, if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this video, there's a link down below in the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's hop right into it. Hopping directly into it, the first thing that you guys are going to want to do is go down below in the description of this video and find the link which takes you to this Patreon post right here. Now, you might be thinking that I'm trying to sell you my Patreon, but no, this post is actually completely free and everybody's able to access it. What's included in this post is a couple of GUI assets that we use for creating the GUI in the series. I added another image to this asset pack that you guys can go ahead and download, and we're going to be using that in this episode. Once you have that asset downloaded, what you're going to want to do is go into Roblox Studio, click on the View tab, click on Asset Manager, and then click on this bulk import button right here. Then go ahead and find wherever that image is and go ahead and upload it just like that, and now we have the lock.png uploaded inside of our assets. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and close the asset manager because we're pretty much done with that for right now. Okay, now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to be actually creating the GUI which goes on each of the individual portals in our game. The way that we're going to do this is by going into the Star GUI and adding in a brand new screen GUI, and we're going to rename that to Portals. Inside of the properties, we want to make sure that we set the reset on spawn property to false. Once you're done that, what you guys are going to want to do is inside of the screen GUI is add a brand new surface GUI, and we're going to rename the surface GUI to template just like that. Once you have the surface GUI, what you're going to want to do is just add a frame to this. Now, once you've done that, you're going to want to go inside of your workspace, inside of the portals folder, and go ahead and find a specific portal. We're just going to take the forest portal, for example, which is right here. Now, you want to make sure that you have this portal part right here, which is actually going to be a specific part that players can step on, and whenever they touch this part, it'll either open up a GUI or teleport them to the specific island. So make sure that you have a specific part for doing that. If you're unfamiliar with this, or maybe don't have this, you guys can go back a couple of episodes and see where I added this directly into our game. Let's go back down into the Star GUI and actually click on the Surface GUI. Now, the Surface GUI has a property called Adornee, and what this property does is when you click on it, it allows you to set the property to a specific instance. Now, for example, let's go ahead and click on this mesh part called Portal, and if you guys didn't realize, this mesh part is this green portal part right here. Now that we've set the Adornee of this specific Surface GUI, what we also want to do is we want to adjust the face. Now, because of how our part is set up, we want to set the face to the left, and now we can actually see the Surface GUI appearing on our screen. You might have to mess around with the faces a little bit because maybe your parts aren't rotated the same way as mine, but eventually you should be able to figure it out, and you should see a little GUI pop up like we see right there. Now, like I was saying, what this Adornee part actually does is it basically allows you to select a specific part in which you want this GUI to appear on. Now, normally with surface GUIs, you would think that you would need to put this specific surface GUI inside of this portal part right here for it to appear on there, but you actually don't need to do that. Instead, you can use the Adornee part, so you're able to store your surface GUI anywhere you want, and then just set the Adornee to whatever part you want this GUI to actually appear on, just like we did. Now, another reason why we're creating these surface GUIs and putting them inside of a screen GUI inside of the starter GUI is because I like to store all of my GUIs inside of the starter GUI. Now, something you might be considering is why are we using a screen GUI for holding surface GUIs? That doesn't really make sense, and what's the point of that? Well, what I used to do in a lot of my other projects is I would create a folder and then let's just say rename this to Portals, and then I would store all of my surface GUIs inside of this folder right here. The issue that comes along with this is that when a player respawns, all the surface GUIs can be reset. But if you use a screen GUI and set the reset on spawn property to false, then that issue is completely avoided. So that's one of the reasons that we're storing that inside of a screen GUI inside of the Star GUI. Another reason is that if we added any buttons, like for instance a text button or an image button or anything like that that the player can actually interact with, if the surface GUI is not stored inside of the starter GUI, then the players are usually unable to actually click on those buttons. They just don't work. Now, you're probably thinking, well, I don't plan to add any buttons or anything else like that to this GUI, and don't worry, we're not actually going to be doing that. I just wanted to explain a couple of different reasons why we're using the starter GUI and then also why we're using a screen GUI to hold these surface GUIs, because GUIs in Roblox can become very complicated and little issues can pop up that you have no idea about unless you have a lot of experience with developing stuff on Roblox, and these are kind of just things that you figure out along the way. Okay, now that we have all that information out of the way, let's go ahead and start actually creating the surface GUI. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to delete this frame. The only reason that we made that frame was so I can visualize and show the GUI to you so that you can actually see it and make sure that it appears on your screen. What we're actually going to do is we're going to add a UI list layout to this, and then we're also going to add an image label to this as well. Now that we have that image label added, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and open up our asset manager, and we want to get that lock image that we just uploaded and copy the ID of that. Now that we have the ID, we can go to our image label, type in image, and set the image property to that ID just like that. Then for the background transparency, we want to set that to 1 because we don't want there to be any background. And then we also want to adjust the scale type property from stretch to fit. And when we do this, it'll make the image look a lot lot better and not look stretched at all. So this is really nice. Then for the sizing, for right now, we're just going to set it to 0.1, 0, 0.1, 0 so that it's scaled. Then what we're going to do is we're going to rename the image label from image label to lock. And for the sides, let's go ahead and actually increase this. So for the X, we're going to set that to about 0.4. And for the Y, we're going to try to set that to 0.2, just like that. Then going inside of the UI list layout, what we want to do is we want to set the horizontal alignment to center. And then we also want to set the vertical alignment to center as well. And now we can see that lock image is appearing in the center of the portal. Next, what we want to do is we want to actually add a text label inside of the Surface GUI, and we're going to rename this to price. For the background transparency, we're going to set that to 1. For the text, we're just going to set this to 100 M space clicks. For the text color, we're going to set that to yellow. We're going to also set the text to scaled. For the font, we of course want to use the Gotham, and we probably want to make that bold as well. Then of course we can go ahead and adjust the sizing. For the size, at least for the X scaled, we're going to set that to 0.75, and for the Y scaled, we're going to set that to 0.1 as well, and now that looks pretty good. Then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate that text label and rename it to message. Now for the text of this, we're going to set it to double jump or purchase to unlock, exclamation mark, just like that. For the text color, we want to set that to white, and then we can go ahead and adjust the sizing. So for the sizing, we're going to make this a little bit smaller on the X scale, so we're going to set that to 0.7, and then we're also going to increase the sizing on the Y scale and set that to 0.2, just like that. Then if we go ahead and select the UI list layout, let's go ahead and adjust the scale of the padding a little bit, and we're going to set this to 0.025 so that there's a slight spacing between the text labels and the image as well. Now I think that looks pretty good. If you guys want to make any adjustments, you of course can. Once you guys are finished with this, the last thing you want to do is actually set the Surface GUI to no longer be enabled, just like that. Okay, so now that we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and create the GUI for when a player is able to purchase an island. So what we're going to do is inside of the Starter GUI, we're going to create a brand new screen GUI, and we're going to rename this to Purchase Island. For the ignore GUI inset property, we're going to set that to true, and then for reset on spawn, we're going to set that to false. Then inside of the screen GUI, we're going to add a brand new frame. For the size of this frame, we want to make sure that we set it to scaled. For the X, we're going to set that to 0.3, and for the Y, we'll also set that to 0.3 as well. Then, of course, we want to center this, so we're going to set the anchor point to 0.5, and the position to 0.5, just like that. Next, we might as well go ahead and adjust the background color, and we're going to set it to like a kind of darkish blue color, just like that. We also want to make sure that we set the border size pixel to 0 so that there's no actual border. Additionally, we can go ahead and add a UI corner to this as well. And then for the corner radius, we might want to set that to 0.1, maybe like 0.075 so that there's a little bit less curved. And I think that looks pretty good. Next, what we're going to do is inside the frame, let's go ahead and add a text button, and we're going to rename this to exit. For the background color, let's go ahead and set that to a red. For the text, let's go ahead and set that to an X. And for the text color, we want to set that to white. We also want to make the text scaled, and then let's go ahead and start adjusting the size. For the X scaled on the size, well, let's go ahead and set that to 0.1, and for the Y scale, let's go ahead and set that to 0.2. For the font, let's go ahead and set that to Gotham, and let's make sure that that's bold as well, and then we can go ahead and move that over to the top right corner of the GUI, and I think that looks pretty good, but let's go ahead and add a UI corner to this as well. For the corner radius, I think we're going to try to set that to 0.1, and that actually looks pretty good, so yeah, we're going to leave that as is. Next, what we want to do is inside of this frame, let's go ahead and add a text label, and we're going to rename this to title. Now for the text, we actually want to set this to by zone, just like that, and we want to set the text color to white. We of course can then go ahead and set the background transparency to 1. For the font, we of course want that to be Gotham, and we want to make that bold as well, and we want to make sure that we set the text to scaled as well, just like that, and now we can adjust the sizing. For the X scale, we're going to set this to 0.42, and for the Y scale, we're going to set that to 0.2, just like that. Then of course we want to make sure that we center this at least on the X axis, so we're going to say 0.5 for the anchor point and 0.5 for the position. We might want to move this down a little bit as well, so we're going to say 0.05, and now that moved it down a little bit, maybe we want to do like 0.025. I think that looks pretty good. Then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the title text label, and we're going to rename this from title to subtitle. Now for the text, we actually want to set this to unlock by double jumping, or buy now for, and then there we go. For the size of this, at least for the X, we're going to set that to 0.875, and for the Y, we're going to leave that at 0.2. Now, of course, we want to position this a little bit further down, so we're going to try like 0.3, and wow, that was actually a pretty good guess. I think that actually looks perfectly fine right there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the subtitle as well, and we're going to rename this to price. Now, for the text of the price, we're just going to set that to 200 M space clicks, just like that, so that we have some placeholder text. For the text color, they have it as like a yellow, so we're going to set it just like that. Now we need to position this a little bit better. So let's go ahead and adjust the positioning, at least on the Y-axis, and we're going to try this at 0.49, and I think that looks pretty good. Let's make sure that it's not over top any of the other labels, so I think that's good. And then let's also decrease the sizing a little bit, so I think that looks pretty good. Then what we want to do is inside of this frame, we want to actually add a brand new frame, and we're going to rename this to buttons. Then of course, let's go ahead and adjust the sizing so that this is scaled just like that, and let's move this down as well. Now for the buttons, there's actually going to be 2 buttons, and they're going to be like down here, sort of in this area, so let's go ahead ahead and resize this frame a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. Let's also go ahead and center this on the x-axis by adjusting its anchor point and position, just like that. Now, inside of this frame, let's go ahead and add a UI grid layout to this. Then what we also want to do is duplicate the exit text button and drag that inside of the button's frame. And we're going to rename this to deny. And we'll also make another button in a second as well. Now, going into the UI grid layout, let's go ahead and adjust the padding to just 0 for everything for right now. For the cell size, we're going to set this to like 0.49, 0, 1, 0. So that's a little bit less than half of the entire width, but it is the entire height of the frame. Then what we're going to do is for the deny button, we're actually going to change the background color to a little bit of a lighter red, just like that. And for the text, we also are going to set that to nothing. So we're going to go ahead and delete that X and put it just like that. Then we're going to duplicate the title, drag that inside of the deny text button. And now for the text, we're going to say no thanks. For the sizing, we're going to make this pretty large. So we're going to say 0.9, 0, 0.9, 0. For the positioning, we want to make sure that we center that. So let's go ahead and adjust the Y positioning just like that. Now we also might want to put a little bit of a stroke on this text. So we're going to go ahead and adjust the stroke transparency to about probably 0.5. I think that looks fine. Then what we can do is we can actually adjust the background transparency of the button's frame to 1 so that we no longer see it. And we can go ahead and duplicate the deny button and rename it to accept. Then of course for the accept button, we want to change the background color of that to be a green. So there we go. And if we go inside of the accept button, we want to modify the title to say buy now, just like that. Okay, the only other thing that we really need to do is we need to actually adjust the cell padding in the UI grid layout. And for the X, we are going to set this to 0.01. And now there's a small space in between them. Additionally, for the horizontal alignment, we want to set that to center. And for the vertical alignment, we want to set that to center as well so that they're both centered. Now, there's one more thing that we can actually do, and that's going into our plugins. And as long as you have the auto scale light plugin, what you can do is you can click on this frame and then click on add constraint, and that'll add a UI aspect ratio constraint to this, which isn't really needed, but it's good practice. So I just like to show you guys that. Additionally, let's go ahead and click on test. And now we can see what this looks like from a mobile view, and it looks normal. So that means that we got everything correctly, and this is all looking pretty good. Now that we're finished creating the GUI, we're going to go ahead and set the enable to false so we no longer see it. Now what we're going to start doing is scripting the Portals GUI. So we're going to go inside of the starter player, inside of the starter player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, and add a brand new local script to this. We're then going to rename the local script to Portals, and now we can start scripting. Before we start scripting, what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of this currency folder, inside of this currency script, and we're just going to grab a bunch of the variables that are inside of here. So all of these variables right here, and then we're going to go back to our Portal script, and we're going to paste them all directly inside of here as well. Now for the GUI variable, we want to change this wait for child from left to Portals, and we also want to delete the frame variable, and we instead want to replace that with a variable called template, and that's actually going to be equal to GUI.template, just like that. Next, what we want to do is we want to create a couple of static variables. If we go inside of our Portals GUI, inside of the template, we can see that we have this message text label right here, which actually has some text on it. So we're going to go ahead and copy that. For the first variable, of course, it's going to be in all capital letters because this is a static variable and it's not meant to change. And the first one is going to be called unlock underscore current underscore text, and that's going to be equal to this string right here. So double jump or purchase to unlock exclamation mark, just like that. We'll then create another static variable. This one is going to be called unlock next underscore text, and that's going to be equal to a string which says unlock previous zone first exclamation mark. And we're going to create one more static variable which is called price underscore text, and that's going to be equal to amount in all capital letters space clicks, just like that. Okay, so now let's think a little bit about the logic as to how we want this to work. What we want to do is we basically want to get this template and we want to clone it, and we want to use this template and basically create a GUI for each of the individual portals right here. So going back into our portal script, how do we figure out all of the different areas? Well, luckily we have a config module for all of the islands inside of our game, so we're going to go ahead and require that. So we're going to say local islands config, and that's going to be equal to replicated storage.configs.islands, just like that. Now that we have that module, what we can then do is actually loop through all of the islands in the config. So we're going to say for island props in islands config.config do. And then what we want to do is above this, we want to actually create a function called generate portal, and that'll actually accept a string, which is going to be called island. And there we go. Now, when we go through this loop, we want to actually call the generate portal function, and we want to pass through the specific island that we want to generate. Okay, so next what we want to do is we want to actually create a variable called clone, and that's going to be equal to template, and we want to clone that specific template. Now, once we clone it, we need to make sure that we parent it to something, and what we're going to do is we're going to parent that to the screen GUI called portals. We also want to adjust the name of this template, and we want to set that name to the specific island. And finally, we want to make sure that we set the Adornee property of the brand new clone to the specific portal part. And how are we going to get this portal part? Well, remember, they're stored inside of our workspace. So let's actually go ahead and create a variable for the workspace, just like that. And now let's actually look at our explorers so that I can show you exactly what we're going to do. We want to go inside of the workspace, inside of the portals folder. And now inside of the portals folder, we have a couple of models, which are all named after a specific island. So for instance, let's say that we're using the forest island, and inside of here, we have a mesh part called portal. So going back to the script, we want to say workspace .portals, index that with a specific island, and then we want to get the specific part named portal inside of that model, just like that. Okay, so now how this is going to work is basically this loop is going to go through every single island, and then this function is going to be called for every single one, and this is basically just going to create the GUI and set it up for every single portal. Next, what we want to do is we want to actually create a function called update portals, and that's not going to accept any arguments. And what we're actually going to do inside of this function is we're actually going to loop through all the children inside of the screen GUI. So we're going to say for underscore portal GUI in GUI get children do. Now, once we do that, the first thing that we want to do is we want to actually check if the portal GUI.name is equal to template, because if it is, then all we want to do is continue end. And the reason that we're checking that is because we're always going to have this surface GUI called template. So while looping through all the children inside of this specific GUI, if we get to the template service GUI, we just want to skip it because we don't actually want to do anything to it. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to actually create a variable for the island info, and that's going to be equal to island config.config, and then we want to index that with the portal GUI.name. And remember, the portal GUI is actually going to be named the specific island, so that's why we're using the name. And then let's also create a variable called isUnlocked, and that's going to be equal to islandconfig.isIslandUnlocked, and then we need to pass that the state manager.getData as well as the specific island, so portal GUI.name, just like that. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to actually make sure that we enable this GUI. So we're going to say portal GUI.enabled equals true, just like that. Additionally, we're going to go ahead and set the price of the specific portal. So we're going to say portal GUI.price.text equals, and now we're going to use our static variable price text, and then we're going to say G sub on that. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace the word amount with format number dot format compact island info dot price, just like that. Okay, so now that we set the price, the next thing we need to do is actually set the text of that message label. So we're going to say portal GUI dot message dot text, and by default we want to set that to unlock next text, just like that. Then what we want to do is we want to actually check if the island info contains a requirement. Now if you guys don't remember what the requirement property of each of the islands are, certain islands have a property called requirement, which basically says that player needs to unlock the previous island before they're able to unlock this specific island. The only island that doesn't have this property is the first island in our game, which is the forest island. So if there is a requirement, then we want to create a variable called isRequirement unlocked, and that's going to be equal to the island config dot is island unlocked, and of course once again we want to pass through the state manager dot get data, and then we want to pass through the island info dot requirement, just like that. Now if the player does have the requirement unlocked, then what we want to do is we want to set the portal GUI dot message dot text to unlock current text, just like that. Now if the island does not have a requirement, then what we want to do is we want to set the portal GUI dot message dot text to unlock current text as well. And then outside of this if statement, what we then want to check is if the island is actually unlocked. So if it is unlocked, then what we want to do is we want to say portal GUI.enabled, and we're going to set that to false because we don't want the GUI to appear any longer on the portal. Now that we have that function created, what we're going to do is we want to actually call the update portals function after we generate all of the portals. Okay, now just to recap on the logic behind all of this. When our game first starts, we're going to loop through all the islands inside of our game using the islands config module. Each time we loop through an island, we're going to call the generate portal function. What this function is going to do is it's going to clone our initial service GUI, then we're going to parent it to the portal screen GUI, then we're going to rename it to the specific island that this is for, and then we're also setting the Adornee property of the GUI so that it appears on the specific portal part that we want it to. Now after we create all the GUIs, we're then going to call the update portals function, which is going to go through all the GUIs that we just created. First, it's going to check if the GUI is called template. If it is, then it's just going to continue through this for loop and basically ignore that specific GUI. Then we're creating a couple of variables. Then we set the enabled property of the GUI to true so that we can actually see it. We also set the price text label to the specific price and the message text label to the unlock next text right there. Then we check if the island requires a previous island to be unlocked before the player can unlock that specific island. And if it does have a requirement and that requirement is unlocked, then what we're going to do is we set the message text to the unlock current text. Or if the island does not have a requirement, then we also set it to the same text as well. Then finally, if the island is unlocked, then we set the GUI to not be enabled because we no longer want to see it. Now there's one more thing that we need to do in this script, and that's actually listen to a specific remote. So we're going to say remotes.updateIsland. And now this is a remote event that's fired anytime a player unlocks an island from the server. So we're going to say .onClientEvent, connect, function. And then all we want to do is say task.delay, wait 0 seconds. And then we want to call the update portals function just like that. So you might have been confused as to why we create this update portals function instead of doing a lot of the stuff inside of the generate portal function. The reason why we didn't do a bunch of this stuff inside of this specific function is because whenever a player unlocks an island, we're going to need to do the same things as well. So there's no point in doing this stuff inside of the generate portal function if we're going to also have to do it every single time a player unlocks an island anyway. So now we can quickly test just some of this. So we're going to hop into our game. And now if we look at our portals, we can actually see that they all appear with the GUIs on them. We can see how much each of them cost, and we can see that each of them have a specific message as well. Let's go ahead and use our debugs islands command and say unlock the forest island. And now when we do that, we can actually see that this disappears, and we can see that this is updated as well. So now this displays double jump or purchase to unlock instead of unlock previous zone first, and that means that this is working pretty good. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to actually start scripting the purchase GUI that we just created as well. So to do this, we're going to go inside of the start player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, and we're actually going to create a module script this time, and that's actually going to be called Purchase Island. Now, inside of the script, we want to get most of the basic variables, so we're going to go inside of our portal script and just copy a bunch of the variables that we had inside of here as well, and then we're going to paste them towards the top of the script just like this. We also want to rename this module as well, so we're going to do it just like that, and now we can start making some more variables. So for the GUI, we actually want to use the Purchase Island GUI just like that. Then of course, instead of the template, we want to actually create a variable for the frame, so that's going to be equal to GUI.frame. Then we go ahead and create a variable called price, and that's going to be equal to frame.price. Then we go ahead and create a variable for the exit button, that's going to be equal to frame.exit. And then we can create a variable for the accept and deny button, and that's going to be equal to frame.buttons.accept. And then we want to do the same exact thing for deny, and there we go. Then we go ahead and create a static variable down here called price underscore text, and that's going to be equal to amount in all caps space clicks, just like that. And now we've got most of our variables created. Then what we're going to do is inside of this module table, we want to actually create a variable. So we're going to say purchase island dot island, and that's going to be equal to nil by default. Now the reason that we're creating a module script is because we're going to create another script for when a player touches a portal part. Whenever a player touches a portal part, we either want to teleport the player to the specific area, or we might want to display the purchase GUI so that the player is able to purchase that island. Now the way that this system is going to work is a player is going to touch a specific part of the portal, and whenever they do that, if the purchase GUI should be enabled, what we're then going to do is we're going to set this specific variable of the module to the specific island of the portal that the player has touched, so that we know what island the player actually wants to unlock. Anyway, that's a little confusing, but if you follow along, you should understand. The first thing that we'll do is we'll script the exit button. So mouse button one click, connect, anonymous function, and of course what we want to do is we want to set the GUI.enabled to false, just like that. Now we can go ahead, copy and paste this because we want to do the exact same thing if the player clicks the deny button, and then we're going to paste that one more time, and we're going to rename that to accept. So now that we can actually start scripting the accept button, but we're not going to script the accept button yet, so we're just going to leave that as is. The next thing we want to do is add a function to this module. So we're going to say function purchase island.display GUI, and what this is going to do is it's going to accept a string argument, which is actually going to be the island that the player is trying to unlock. Inside of this function, we want to create a variable, of course, called island info, and that's going to be equal to islandsconfig.config and index that with a specific island. Then we want to create a variable for the price, and that's going to be equal to island info.price. Now whenever the GUI appears on the screen, we want to update the price label with the actual price of the island. So we're going to say price.text equals price text g sub, replace the word amount with format number .format compact price, just like that. Additionally, when this method is called, we want to set the GUI to be enabled, and we also want to set the purchase island variable to the specific island as well, just like that. So this function is going to be called from a local script, and inside that local script is where we're going to actually listen to when a player touches a portal. So when this function is called, it's going to set the price text, it's also going to make the GUI enabled, and then we're also going to be setting this island variable right here to the specific island that the player wants to unlock. So with all that in mind, if a player wants to unlock an island, they're going to click on the accept button. Now, we need to actually create a remote so that we can communicate from the client to the server and tell the server, hey, we want to actually unlock an island. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the remotes folder, and we're going to add a brand new remote event, and we're going to rename that to purchase island, just like that. So now, back inside of our script, what we want to do is we want to say if purchase island.island then. So if this variable is set, what we want to do is we want to say remotes.purchase island fire server, and we want to pass through the purchase island.island variable, just like that. Now afterwards, we then want to set the GUI to no longer be enabled, and we also want to clean up the purchase island variable, and we're going to set that to false as well. And we also want to set this variable to false if we click the deny button or the exit button as well, just like that. Now realistically, considering we have the same exact code in 3 different functions, we could create one function for this, but considering the code is so small, I'm not going to do that. I'm just suggesting if you guys wanted to, you definitely could, because it would make sense here. So now that we added that brand new remote event to our game, we actually need to go into our server scripts and implement using this remote event so that the player can actually request to unlock a specific island. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the server script service, inside of this islands module script right here, and then we can come down to the bottom, and then we can go down to the bottom of the script. And what we then want to do is we want to say remotes.purchaseisland.onServerEvent, and we want to connect that to an anonymous function, which is going to accept a player and an island. And then what we want to do is we want to say islands, and then call the unlock island method, and we want to pass through the player, the island, and true, because we want to use the currency if this remote event is being called. So now we set up the communication between the client and the server, and whenever the client communicates that they want to purchase an island, the unlocked island function will be called, which will try to unlock the island for the player if they are able to unlock it. Next, what we need to do is we actually need a script touching the portals and then doing something. So what we can do is we can close out most of the scripts that we have, and then we want to go inside of the star player scripts and add a brand new local script to this, which is going to be called Portals, just like that. And of course, we're going to need some of our common variables. So from the purchase island, I'm just going to copy a bunch of these variables right here and paste them directly into here. Now we also want to create 2 more variables. The first variable is going to be called player, and that's of course going to be equal to players.localPlayer. And then we also want to create a variable called player scripts, which is going to be equal to player.playerscripts, just like that. Then we actually need to get our purchase island module script that we created. So we're going to say require player scripts, wait for child, and we want to wait for the GUI folder, and then we can index that folder with the purchase island to get the module script, just like that. Now that we have those variables, let's go ahead and create our first function, and this is going to be called register portal touch, and that's not going to accept any arguments. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to go inside of the workspace, and we're going to get the portals folder, and then we want to loop through all the portals inside of this folder. Then what we're going to do is inside of each of these individual models, they have this mesh part called portal, which is what we're going to listen to whenever this part is touched, and then we're going to actually do something with that. So going back to our script, we're going to say for_portal in workspace.portals get children do. Then we're going to create a variable called touch part, which is going to be a mesh part, and that's going to be equal to portal.portal, just like that. Now that we have that touch part, we want to say touch part.touched, and we want to connect that to an anonymous function, which is going to accept an other part as an argument. Then what we're going to do is once this is touched, we want to create a variable for the player, and that's going to be equal to players get player from character, and then we're going to pass through the other part .parent. Now we want to actually check if we get a player. So if not player, or if the player does not equal the local player, then what we want to do is we just want to return end and stop the function right there. Next, what we want to do is we want to actually check if the player has this island unlocked. So we're going to say local is island unlocked, and that's going to be equal to islandsconfig.isIslandUnlocked. We of course need to pass through the state manager.getData and the specific island, which is going to be the name of the portal. Now if the island is unlocked, then we want to teleport the player, which we'll do in a minute, but we're going to come back to that. If the island is not unlocked, then we want to check if this island has a requirement or not. The reason for this is, for example, we want the player to be able to purchase the forest island, but we don't want them to be able to purchase the Arctic island before they purchase the forest island. So that's the logic behind what we're doing right now. So we're going to create a variable called requirement, and of course that's going to be equal to islandconfig.config, index that with the specific island, so portal.name requirement, just like that. Now if there is a requirement, then we want to check if that requirement is unlocked. So we're going to create a new variable called is requirement unlocked, and that's of course going to be equal to islandconfig.isIslandUnlocked, and then we'll pass through the state manager.getData, and then we're going to pass through the requirement as well, just like that. Now if the requirement is unlocked, then what we want to do is we want to actually display the GUI to the player. So we're going to say purchase island, and then we need to call the display GUI method, and we want to pass through the portal.name, just like that. Now if the island does not have a requirement, then we also want to call the purchase island GUI.display GUI and pass through the portal.name as well, just like that. So if the player has the island unlocked, then we're going to teleport the player to that specific island. Otherwise, we want to check if the island has a requirement, and if they have the requirement unlocked, then we're going to display the GUI to that player as well. Or if the island does not have a requirement, then we're also going to display the GUI to the player as well. Now there's one more thing that we want to do to this, and we want to actually add a debounce to this because we don't want to constantly spam the player. So what we're going to do is we're going to go towards the top of the script, and we're going to create a variable variable called debounce, and that's going to be equal to false. Then towards the bottom of this function, we're going to say debounce equals true. Then we'll say task.delay. We'll wait 0.5 seconds, and then we'll set debounce to false, just like that. And now we actually need to add this into our function. So right here where we check if there is a player, we're also going to say if debounce, then return end, just like that. So now we actually have to call this function. So we're going to say register portal touch and call that function just like that. And then above this function, we actually need to create another function called teleport to island. And what that's going to do is going to accept an island. And inside of here, we want to create a variable called teleport part. And to show you how all of our islands are set up, if we go inside of the workspace, we have a folder called islands. Inside of here is each individual island, and each individual island has a part called spawn right here, which is where we want the player to spawn whenever they teleport to this specific island. So going back to our script, we're going to say workspace.islands and then index that with the specific island, and then we're going to index that folder with spawn, and then we'll have our specific part. Next, we want to go ahead and get the player's character. We're going to say local player equals player.character. If character, so if we do find a character, then what we want to do is we want to say character pivot to, so we're going to teleport the player's character, and then we're going to say teleport part.cframe, just like that. Now that we have the function created, we can go ahead and call that function right here. So we're going to say teleport to island, and we're going to pass through the portal.name, which is going to be that specific island, just like that. Okay, so let's go into our game and start testing this out. So as soon as we spawn into our game, we can see the portals are generated. If we go to this portal, we actually see the buy GUI pops up. If we go inside of here, nothing is happening when we touch these portals, which means that this is working correctly. So when we touch this portal, if we click buy now, nothing happens because we don't have enough money, but let's go ahead and give ourselves enough money. Now let's go ahead and click on buy now, and we can see that this portal is actually now unlocked. So if we go ahead and step on it, we can see that we've actually been teleported to the island. But if we step on this portal, nothing happens. So we actually have to start doing that next. Real quick though, if we come back to our portals, we can actually see, we can walk into this, and now the GUI pops up for this one as well, which means that it seems like this script is working pretty good. So to begin scripting the portals for each of the individual islands, we're going to go back inside of our portals local script that we just created. And then underneath of the register portals function, we're going to actually create a new function, which is called register return portal touch. And that's going to accept no arguments. Now inside this function, the first thing we want to do is create a variable called spawn part. And that's actually going to be equal to workspace.spawn location. The reason for that is because anytime a player goes through, say, this portal, for example, we want them to be teleported to this spawn location right here. Of course, you can set up your own part if you want to, but that's what we're going to be using for this example. The next thing we want to do is we want to loop through all of the islands. So we're going to say for underscore island in workspace.islands get children do. Then we're going to create a variable called portal part, which is going to be a mesh part, and that's going to be equal to island.portal.portal, just like that. And then we're going to say portal part .touched connect. We're going to create an anonymous function inside of here, which is of course going to accept the other part. And we kind of want to do the same thing that we did earlier. We're going to say local player equals players get player from character. Then we want to pass through the other part .parent, and we can literally copy this if statement right here. So if not player, or if the player does not equal the local player, then we want to return end. And then we're going to say other part .parent, and then we want to say pivot to, and then we want to teleport the player's character to the spawn part .cframe, just like that. And finally, we want to make sure that we call the register return portal touch function, just like that, and then we'll start up our game and test this out. So go into our game, let's go ahead and unlock the first portal. We teleport through the portal to this specific island, and now if we go back through this portal, we can see that we actually spawn right there, which means that this is working perfectly. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that's going to be it for this episode. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. As always, if you did, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. I also have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this video. There's a link down below the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.